Parker Ranch, one of the largest private landowners in the state of Hawaii, is taking a look at Waimea's potential for renewable energy. Parker Ranch President and CEO Dutch Kuiper told the Waimea Community Association during its most recent meeting that an integrated energy resource plan is being put together. The plan will look into the feasibility of tapping into Parker Ranch's potential for renewable energy to benefit Waimea, North Kohala, and Hawaii Island. Kuiper told the group the timing is right to start now.
We're trying to move from a world where it seems that uncertainty has entered our universe and may actually even be increasing. The predictability of these things that are around us that we can't control.
Kuiper gave a PowerPoint presentation to the association, laying out the need on the island, especially in Waimea, where the ranch is so deeply involved in the community.
And so the real question is, with these high energy prices, is there anything that we can do as a community? And it's probably the one thing that I get asked about more than anything. And I think those of you that live here, that know Waimea, that are residents of Waimea, you can just sort of turn around 360 degrees and you can see not just the natural beauty that we have, but really the significant endowment in natural resources that we have. So really this presentation is about us kicking off a process. This is very early in this process, but we wanted to make sure you were aware, and I'll give you some background as to what we're going to be doing, but also why we've really come out at this point, this early. So how does expensive electricity affect us? So what I thought was, just for your benefit, to get two brief case studies. On the left-hand side is a summary of our cattle operation on the Mauna Kea lands. We really have two major aspects to our cattle operation, the Mauna Kea lands and our Kohala lands. In Mauna Kea, we have to move the water uphill and distribute it across Mauna Kea to get the water to the cattle. But we thought it would be interesting to look at what that income statement would look like if our electricity costs were the national average instead of what we pay here in Hawaii, which is 3 to 4 times the national average. And for us, that line burden, which you might be able to see circled in red, says $38 to $40 per calf per year. That may not sound like a lot of money, but that's essentially 10% of the value of that production. So imagine if you had, theoretically, a 10% profit margin. That profit margin is now gone, okay? The hospital, I think, is a particularly interesting case study because it's so integral to the community and also to the ranch. It's the largest beneficiary of the ranch. The hospital's electric bill, its annual electric bill, is between 1.2 and 1.4 million. That depends on as rates have changed over the last few years. And similarly, the burden above and beyond, if that hospital were in an average rural community in the average town in the United States, in the 48 states, it would pay almost $1 million less per year in electricity. For a rural hospital in a small community with 33 beds, an emergency room, 3 operating rooms, it's really stunning. And that actually translates to about 2% of revenues. And as you probably know, most community hospitals don't operate with a sense of margin, if you will. They're largely a cost recovery through Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement sort of model. And so 2% of revenues is obviously a substantial number. So this is really the compelling case for us as to why we're focused on this. So as I mentioned, the top frame of this page highlights that we pay very high electricity. On the right-hand side, what it highlights is the fact that about $5 to $6 billion leaves the state every year in the form of oil purchases that feed actually both electricity as well as fuel, gasoline for our transportation for our vehicles. Oahu utility, the Big Island, and Maui. And the thing I'd like to highlight here is the magnitude of the red which is the electricity that comes from independent power producers. You may hear from time to time that this island has a significant portion of its electricity come from renewables, which is true. Just about half of our electricity comes from renewables. But a significant portion of that red is actually priced in oil. When those contracts were written, the price in those contracts was avoided cost, which is effectively oil. So a substantial portion of the pass-through really is oil, not necessarily fuel oil and the direct costs and maybe a small margin in renewables. And what this shows is in outer years, rates just continue to rise. And we're not quite sure the range of the increase in rates. So there's a high degree of uncertainty here, not just a sense that they're going to rise, but a high degree of uncertainty as well. This is actually a slide that the utility submitted as part of its integrated resource plan, as part of the resource planning process, which is a mandated process. The PUC requires the utility to do this. And there's two major elements to those resource plans. There's a 20-year resource plan that's basically the generation mix. How are we going to produce electricity? And then there's a 5-year action plan. What are we going to do in the next 5 years to get that done? The IRP that was submitted by the utility, as some of you may know who followed this, was essentially given there's an independent entity that's appointed by the PUC to review that process. And that independent entity could not, quote unquote, certify the resource plan. That essentially there was a series of criteria that the Public Utilities Commission had set for the utility to meet, and essentially they didn't meet it. And so essentially that process is in limbo, and it's in limbo for a particular set of reasons, but the most important of which is there's no clear set of rules or procedures for the PUC to follow on what happens if a resource plan isn't accepted by the PUC. It's the first time in the history of the state of Hawaii that a resource plan is in this sort of limbo status. In those resource plans, at least for this island, the two main new sources of generation were going to be geothermal and biomass, I think as many of you know. And this is really why we're here today. We could have waited till we sort of got through phase 1 of these resource plan and assessments on behalf of the ranch and the community and come forward with some concepts. But because the resource plan for the utility is essentially in this sort of no man's land, if you will, we felt it was important to enter the public discourse and basically say, at least for our relevant constituents here in Waimea, Greater Waimea, and North Kohala, that we think there may be some things that we could do. And so we made an announcement a few weeks ago that we've pulled together a team of experts from a couple of different organizations to help us do that. And the primary goal, and I'll get into more detail on this, is to build case studies of what we could do with the resources that we have control over. And some of those ideas may require regulatory change or legislation, which will require that we build an advocacy program, that we get in front of the legislature, that we get in front of the Public Utilities Commission. And so for us, this is really building a series, hopefully, of economically and technically feasible concepts that we can present to the PUC and say, we think we can accomplish these things. How do we get from here to there? So where are we in the process? There's probably 8, 9, 10 major steps in this process. And it'll probably require at least 2 to 3 years of sustained effort. And so right now, we're really between step 1 and 2. We started a process about a year ago of asking for statements of qualifications from companies that have expertise in microgrids. We then converted that to a formal RFP for expertise in resource planning, especially in islanded communities. And that's where we actually made our decision and our announcement to pull that team together about 3 or 4 weeks ago. That work is just kicking off this week. And really, that second step is pure research. It's not even research and development. It's conceptually, what's the state of technology today? Trying to measure the resources that we have, add all that in the mix. What could we do on multiple levels? Just the ranch, adding the hospital, maybe adding other loads, maybe extending that if we can, possibly regionally, including North Kohala. And then we want to take that to stakeholders, including you. So our plan is over the next, I would say it would begin probably 6 months from now. This research process is going to take about 4 to 6 months to complete. But our plan is to come back and say, this is what we could do. Is there any interest? Would the community support this? Is this something that we could work together on? And then part of that case study process will be touching base with stakeholders like the Public Utilities Commission. One of the things I earned by sitting in a lot of IRP meetings in Honolulu with the utility was standing with the PUC commissioners. So legally, I actually have formal standing with the commissioners to comment on the resource plans because I was an IRP advisory group member. We want to leverage that standing with information and content and advocacy. And then from there, we'll take it to HELCO. We'd like to be able to work with HELCO. We'd like to collaborate if we can. And then formally take it through the regulatory process and then these other steps. So just to highlight again, we're very early, but we wanted you to be aware of what we're working on. I met with the PUC commissioners and the governor, and I told them both, I said, the ranch has a special responsibility to agriculture and sustainability in Hawaii, not just as a cattle ranching operation, but as a member of a community like Waimea that has a long history in agriculture and food and energy and water. That sort of sustainability mix is incredibly important to the future of Hawaii. So if we actually have concepts that we're able to develop for Waimea, the plan is to take that playbook and give it to other rural communities in the state of Hawaii. And there's many on this island, there's many on other islands. And so we really think this model potentially could be replicated and that we have a special responsibility to agriculture in the state. So about 10 years ago, the Fed decided to strip energy and food out of core CPI, out of the CPI calculation. Does anybody remember that by any chance? This is 2008 here. And this is 2012, 2013. Core CPI is up basically 9% cumulative over that 5-year period. But where's food and beverage? Food and beverage is almost double that. And energy isn't even on the slide, right? You couldn't even get it on here because oil was up 260, 270% in that same time frame. So why renewable energy? It'll insulate us. It'll protect us. It'll not only keep capital here and keep what you otherwise would be sending as a resident or as a business elsewhere, it would keep that here. In the long run, we should be able to fix prices, reduce that volatility, reduce that uncertainty, and we may even be able to lower prices. My own personal target, if there is one, is to shoot for at least 30% less than today's electricity rates. Otherwise, this may not be worth doing, and maybe even more. So some may have heard that one of the concepts that we're exploring is a microgrid, and just to highlight what this is more from a technical standpoint. Really what a microgrid is instead of the traditional, all the generation is in one location, say in Hilo, and you've got all these transmission lines taking it and distributing it, you actually have multiple locations where you locate the generations, the generation of the electricity, more co-located with where the demand is. This is really the wave, the next wave in electricity and energy distribution. Oftentimes the on-site generation is renewables, 5-acre, 10-acre solar farm, small wind farm. Typically you would allow multiple customers into that mix, not just one. In many cases, university campuses are looking at this. Anybody go to Penn State? by any chance? So Penn State just announced about a month ago that they're exploring islanding the Happy Valley campus, basically making the Happy Valley campus a microgrid. And the ability to island, what that technically means is if the utility goes down for some reason, that you can stay up, that you have the ability to stand on your own and island yourself. So those are the key elements of a microgrid. So our overarching goals, I'm almost done. Undertake a comprehensive evaluation of our potential energy resources, develop a set of feasible concepts, and really there's two paths for us in parallel. There's a Waimea level solution that we want to explore, a community level solution. We also think we have assets that could be deployed at the island level to help bring electricity rates down at the island level, so we're going to study both of those pathways. And really in the end, I should say, we have had a lot of developers approach us. I think I mentioned this last year in the strategy meeting. We've had over 60 proposals for biomass. I'm not sure biomass is the answer to all our problems, but we have seen a lot of proposals. And as a fiduciary, as one of the people that's responsible for overseeing the ranch, the reason why we're adopting this is in part to really know how to judge any of these opportunities, right? To understand what the potential use is in a much broader context, as opposed to just being passive and waiting for whichever idea to come through the front door and sign that deal. We really want to understand what the highest and best use is in terms of deploying those resources.
Toward the end of the presentation, Kuiper deployed a high-tech, real-time survey program.
They're already on. They should be on.
These remote devices were passed out, and the audience keyed in their answers to Kuiper's questions. The answers were quickly tabulated and displayed, revealing where the majority of the community stood on certain sustainability issues.
And there'll be a green light recognizing that your answer's been taken. So the first question is, how long have you lived in Waimea? And I would say greater Waimea, a 5 or 10 mile radius. So the first is less than 2 years. The second answer is 2 to 5 years. The third is 5 to 10 years. 4 is 10 years or more. We'd like to know if you were born and raised in Waimea, what the percentage of that is. And then if you don't live in Waimea, that's okay. Has everybody answered? So 54% are 10 or more years. More than half. All right. So in the last 1 to 2 years, because of the high cost of food, which any one of these, or more than one, have you done periodically in the last 1 to 2 years? 1, hunted or fished. We have a lot of hunters, a lot of our cowboys hunt. Went without a meal, stretched your food budget, visited a local food pantry, participated in federal food stamp program, planted a garden, grown own food. Any that apply. It is many that apply. %50 are gardeners. All right, green thumbs. 32% went without a meal, stretched the food budget. 14% are hunters. Again, select all that apply. 3 is turn off lights more often. 4, reduce usage of appliances. Buy charcoal more often, maybe. Install solar PV system, hot water heater. Switch to gas appliances is number 6, and 7 is other. So what do you got? 1 and 3. So light bulbs and turn off lights more often. And then 2, 4, and 5 are pretty evenly split. Very few switch to gas. Interesting, okay. An alternative source of electricity, such as a community microgrid, using solar, wind, and other renewable sources. All right. What is that combined? That's 95%. Excellent. Good answer.